and Facebook, please type your relevant questions for the panel in the comments, and our comment moderators will do their best to get as many as possible. Also keep note that we are broadcasting live from Zoom. We have guests in our Zoom meeting. If anybody joins the meeting, there will be camera changes and things like that. So you might see some weird things going on, but it's all about the discussion. So let's have a good time. And Barbara, it's all yours. Take it away.
Yeah, so thanks everybody for showing up today, taking time out of your busy schedules. It's Family Day weekend here in Alberta, so thanks for spending it with, our tiny home family here. Thanks to the guests for being here, taking time out of your, I know, busy schedules to answer questions and talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, being off-grid, which I'm not. I guess I'll start right in with the questions because I just want to know what you guys have been up to. The question is for both you guys, like what kind of off-grid projects are you guys working on right now as the year starts up? Because I mean, the weather's getting nicer, the building season is starting. So what kind of projects are you guys working on now? Ladies first, Pam, how about you?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so right now I shall be at Azen Sanctuary up in Rock Creek, BC, and both of their homes are completely off-grid. They actually have a off-grid, I guess it's formulating into community, but a really amazing project and property up there. And they do a lot of so they have actually already an off-grid system that's going on. So we're building their homes based on the systems that they have up there. So it's been a really interesting time, and as always, a bit of a learning curve. So we learn as we go, and we talk to experts, and it's been great. So we're feeling like we're really helping to contribute to people who want to live fairly sovereign on their land. So that's kind of what Sunshine Tiny Homes is up to right now. And Kenton, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, this is my tiny house that you see behind me on my virtual background. It's completely off grid, and it's been just over 8 years now inside the house. So it's actually a very interesting learning curve because when you have battery bank systems, they have a certain lifespan. And this comes down to one of those big decisions is like, how are you going to, yes, sure, capture energy, but how are you going to store it? So I'm actually going through a process of seeing the life cycle of my batteries through and considering different battery technologies. So that's one thing that's on my plate personally right now relative to living off-grid and living in a off-grid tiny house. I'm also in the midst of building a brand new tiny house as a YouTube channel called the Tiny House Master Plan. We're trying to build a house entirely free for free using sponsors and students. We film the whole adventure and journey as we go and try to make this thing the best tiny house that we can possibly make it. And that includes making it off-grid. So it has an off-grid system, solar panels on the roof. It's got state-of-the-art lithium-ion batteries that are normally used in helicopters. So I've got some pretty interesting stuff inside this house. So that's a project which is still always in the background, and I'm working on. It's a community project, so it's a long game one. And then thirdly, working on some very interesting projects right now with clients. So as a permaculture teacher, helping other people understand what does it mean to live a resilient and self-sufficient and sustainable life. A lot of my customers end up wanting to have some mode of off-grid living, whether that's composting toilets, that's one whole angle and thing to talk about, or whether that's the power systems, whether that's how do we get wood heat and be secure with our heating systems in cold places in the world. So lots on the plate related to off-grid living right now.
Wow, sounds like both you guys are really, really busy. And it's only February. So, and the quote unquote building season has only just begun. So yeah, you guys are definitely going to be busy for the rest of the year. Wow, that's awesome. And well, like they say, the busier you are, it keeps you out of trouble.
Better be busy than bored. Better be busy
Yeah.
than bored.
I've had a few people come and talk to me when I was designing and going through my build. They are asking me what off-grid actually means. And I think my build was in 2019. I think a lot of people understand that, but are there varying degrees of off-grid that you can do? For anybody, Pam or Kenton, whoever wants to answer.
I'd say the word usually means exactly as it implies by the grid of the utility systems that we rely on. So we've got, water coming up, we got waste going away, we've got power coming in. These are all things that are connecting us to a larger grid. And sometimes there's fear about that grid being reliable, natural disasters and increasing costs. And I don't know, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. So for a lot of people, off grid means reclaiming those systems for their own self sufficiency and security. But that's just coming from a I didn't go to Webster's, I didn't go to go and look up the definition of what it means, but that's what it means. That's what it means to me. And I think that for a lot of people, that's
Mhm.
why they're doing it. And it means about disconnecting those lines, re-empowering yourself and reclaiming those lines. So whether that's, having wood heat and having storage of propane, or whether that's having your battery bank or wind and solar or hydros for your power. So you make your own microgrid or individual systems for your own self-sufficiency.
Mhm.
Pamela, do you want to add to
Yeah, so we do different levels, and that's exactly right. Like what people's comfortable, like what they're comfortable with, right? So I call it a bit of a hybrid, so you can be sort of on and on grid. And I do apologize. There's a something on my computer I can't turn off. So there's a little bit of background noise, but so when we do sort of a bit of a design discussion with my clients, I kind of ask what their comfortable level is for having an off-grid and compatibility. So we do an off-grid readiness sort of with our homes. So if they want to later on down the road, they can convert quite simply and easily to say solar later on. There's levels of comfort as far as, the off-grid with what type of, composting to incinerating toilet. There's people sometimes have a level of difficulty with their living with propane. So there's always some sort of different attribute or aspect that we need to, go through a discovery with to ensure that their comfort zone is going to be met. But I believe that anybody that goes to off-grid living, there's definitely outside of your comfort zone that happens in that process. So, if you have opportunity, which it would be great, eventual for someone like for me or a builder to have an off-grid opportunity to stay in something like that, which is kind of a goal that I have, to create an off-grid, I guess just a place like an Airbnb or something that people can stay at. So I feel like there's an availability potentially through even what the Azen Sanctuary has to offer. So I can't turn my Slack off, everybody. I don't know how it won't go away. So Frank, if you have any suggestions. Yeah.
I'm not hearing any pinging anyways. I think you're good.
No, you can't. Okay, it's just very distracting. So I can't seem to get it out of whatever it's doing right now, unless maybe if I switch out of there, maybe if I'll just switch out of but it just seems to keep reverting back. So
I'm glad you brought up the hybrid actually, because a lot of people love the idea of living off grid. And when they find out the true cost or the learning curve that can go behind building that system so it's well made, because you can always do something, quick or cheap or light. But if you're relying on your systems to provide for your life needs for heating, for water, or you don't really want those systems to be skimped on. And so I find that so many people are like, yes, I want that. And then they go, oh, wow, that's how much it costs for, this kind of solar system for where I live in the world and how to store it and these good, electronics in the middle. Then they go, oh, can I maybe get a little bit of it? And that brings it to the hybrid where it's like, okay, so maybe you got a generator to back it up. So you're not relying just on your batteries. Or maybe you've got that water tank inside your house. So if your house is on wheels or not, you've got that capacity to have your drinking needs met, but maybe not your shower and your washing machine for a month, because that's a lot of water. So I think there's a really good middle ground for a lot of people where they want to get that little bit of security. They want to play with the lifestyle, but they'd love to still be able to rely on the grid or just a greater sense of security of those utility systems versus taking it all on. Because for most, they've never done it before, and it's a scary leap. So I'm glad that you brought up the hybrid because it is more appropriate for most people.
Well, and there's opportunity. I don't know. I think Ontario they've closed that off, but you know there's opportunity to have solar and you know be connected to on the grid, and actually you end up being paid back by say BC Hydro. So there's a lot of different ways that you can go off grid. You can experiment, you know, you just take it off the grid and see how that works for you. If it's not something that you like we as builders, we really look at, you know, the potential of even people living with composting toilets. They may not like the experience. So we actually have everything all ready to plumb in. We put water at the source and then have all of the hookups there if they want to revert back to having a standard flush toilet. So there's a lot of different things that we can do because I don't know, it's interesting. It's definitely a way of life. It's an adaptation, and you know people's change and life situations change, and sometimes even their geographical location changes. So I know, Barbara, you could even contest to some of that there's been some different places that your house has landed, and sometimes there is just that comfortable level with, a lot of my clients live on other people's land, like they rent land space back, and some people are, you know, they really want you to be connected to the grid. And then there's other people who are fine with you being disconnected. And there are, you know, different laws and different things that you need to take into consideration if you are, you know, kind of doing things a little alternatively. So there's a lot of variables, a lot of moving parts. So it's really good to take a course like Kenton's and get, you know, really acclimated with the procedure of going off grid. And then there's an opportunity to, you know, sit with us and talk about all the different components as a builder, what you can do for now to kind of offset some of those costs, because there is, for 100% off-grid living, there's a significant cost at the beginning, which ends up being a payout towards, you know, years and years into your tiny home living. So it definitely is all personal. I think it's a very personal thing. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely is. So going back just a little bit, Kenton, you mentioned the cost. I was going to ask this question a little later, but since how it was kind of brought up in the discussion, how much, like let's say, how much on a total build of a tiny home would making everything off grid, just a roundabout, like let's say your tiny home costs 100,000. Is it going to be like $80,000 to add in off-grid capabilities?
That's high. I mean, if you wanted to, there's a way to spend that much money. If you're like, no, I want a Tesla Power Wall, and then you want these evacuated solar tubes that are behind me on the wall, like those are $5,000 for that system to get set up. It allows me to have hot water from the sun, and I feel really proud of that. I love it. But will I ever see the propane return on it in terms of dollars? Unlikely, but conscious, like it is, models my values, made me feel more secure, and reduces my propane fills, which is about convenience. So there's a lot of ways you can balance the books different ways. My utility systems, I mean, all in, I think they came close to $25,000. And that was 8 years ago. So prices of some things go down, some things because the supply have gone up. I couldn't give you a firm quote on that. And that was a lot of pioneering though. So again, you don't have to spend $25,000 on your off-grid systems, but to do something that you're like, okay, I want this to be custom to my home, and I need to first figure out what are my needs, how do I want to create this thing, everything do I want it to be? Yes, you can get to that number quite easily. For most, I'd say like 10 to 20. Do expect, you know, like if you go, oh, I got a couple $1,000s, it's like, well, great, but that's not going to go that far. Like a composting toilet that you would buy, that's going to be, you know, well made and CSA approved. You know, there's good toilets out there that are $1.5 grand. People are like, $1.5 grand for my plastic toilet? Like they get a little uptight, but like that's just the toilet. And you know, we haven't even talked about, you know, getting, you know, what kind of batteries. Those are expensive, you know. So cost varies widely.
And there's, sorry, go ahead. Well, there's reconstruction to look at too, if there's things that you're putting in post-build. So there's a lot of that type of activity, and you know, a lot of things that people don't take into consideration the cost of the unit is one thing, but the installation is definitely a different ballgame altogether. So there's a lot of hidden costs that are behind putting in, off-grid systems in your house, and a lot of considerations to take in. And there's a lot of facets because, there's certain things that happen in an off-grid house where we have luxuries with on-grid. We have constant supply of electricity for like heat trace for your water intake. And, there's definitely amplifications of things that originally you might not think about that are over and above the costs. So there's a lot to take into consideration, but I would say, Kenton, you're kind of spot on. It would be at least a minimum of, I think, a solar 15 to 25 would be very realistic picture with incinerating, composting toilets. I mean, the unit itself is $5,000-6,000 if you want a propane operated toilet that burns your poop. And I'm going to say that every time we talk about tiny homes, this is exactly where the discussion always ends up, is where does the waste go, right? So
Where's your toilet?
yeah, and I just had a conversation with my now landlady who I don't live in a tiny house just yet, but I have a location already dedicated. And we just talked about, like, I was coming on to this and she's like, oh, hey, that's amazing. Why don't you, get a completely off-grid tiny home and put it there, versus I was going to pay all of the infrastructure fees, running, the tiny home to the septic field that's here and all power and all this. And I went, I could actually save that money that would put into the infrastructure that I would have to pay back, like, that kind of thing. And I could just put it in a home that's sovereign, that I can take all of those things with me. So that was just kind of like my paradigm shift this afternoon. Yes, why won't I just put that money into my home versus putting that into, the infrastructure? So that was kind of like my something that just was a deciding factor for me today. I would spend $6,000 on an incinerating toilet because I would be spending 10 to 20 on a septic field for a tiny house, So there's a lot of different sort of things that you can think of that help motivate and make solid decisions moving forward with your tiny house, for sure.
Solid decisions, eh?
Solid,
As we talk about toilets, solid decisions.
Yes.
Always
You know
solid.
what? Let's
very punny, Kenton, very punny.
let's keep riffing with it, because ideas is such an important topic to actually
It
dive
is.
into. So let's get into a little bit of teaching here about waste, because
Mhm.
at the end of the day, a lot of people are doing tiny homes from a certain place of like also ethics and feel goods. Like, okay, my house is going to have less impact. Awesome, takes up less land, less building material. It's going to have a better heating bill. So it's going to be easy on the pocket, that resonates with everyone. Of course, everyone who's into tiny homes is like, I can get a house for less. I can heat less. But at the end of the day, when we come down to those ethics and values, it's really important we talk about toilets, because we're not trained about this. We treat poop as we have a fecal phobia. We're afraid of it. And there is reasons to be. It can be unhealthy, but the same, we handle raw chicken all the time, and it can also kill us. So like, we're not, I think it's very important for us to address the squeamishness around this and educate people about how it's not waste, it's a resource. And there's no other animal on the face of the planet that handles their manure like we do. And there's something to be said about that. So there's a free book out there for those who are just hungry to learn about this and just have a little bit of a mind shift, called The Humanure Handbook. Fantastic, hilariously written, as always, when you're dealing with this subject area. Resource for people to dive into. But I would say when it comes to alternative toilets, to get away from the flush system, we've got the DIY composting toilets, which I love teaching people about. And I think it's so important to understand how that works and use as a resource. But for most people, that's outside their comfort zone. They're not there yet. And so that's where the incinerating toilet comes in, and that's where dehydrating toilets come in. Ones that will dehydrate everything and shrink it down, so there's no smell, easier to handle. You can bag it up, you can get rid of it other ways, you can incinerate it. And then there's the ones that are like the $6,000 incinerating toilet we just talked about. And actually, I just saw, thank you, by the way, to the administrators of the meeting for putting all these questions in the chat here in the Zoom for us to read, because I'm seeing there's overlap here from questions for people. And someone asked, like, the incinerating toilet, like, what do you think about it? What are the side effects? How do they work? So this is like a metal chamber. It's got a little incinerating chamber inside of it. You do your duty, it drops in, it burns it. There are electrical options for it, but usually they're propane. It's a heavy draw on electrical. So you're talking living off grid? Yeah, no. If you're using electrical, you are going to need an on-grid supply of electricity to incinerate that electricity. And with propane, it's still going to take quite a bit of propane up to do that, and it runs for a while. So in terms of the questions of does it work well, I have some funny stories here, and I'm going to keep them anonymous because they're from some of my students who've gone and built their tiny homes and lived in it. I stay in touch with them. So one of my good friends, he he had a date over at his tiny house, and he made her a steak dinner, and they had glasses of wine. They had this really romantic atmosphere, you know. And she then asked to use the restroom, and it's a small tiny house. It's not like you gotta give much, just around the corner, you know. It's just right over there. And she went to use it, and he has one of these incinerating toilets in there. And the feedback, the story as it went was she was mortified. And the reason why is the thing has a sound to it as it runs. You know, there's a whirring noise. There's a fan that's blowing air out, and it's forcing and burning, and incinerating stuff. But all she could think about for the rest of the evening while she's supposed to be having this romantic dinner with her date is how she pooped in his tiny house and this thing is running, which I thought was pretty funny. I mean, at the end of the day, we can't expect the thing not to run and not use any noise, but it's good to be aware that, you know, relative to the pros and cons of them, you're still going to have your propane use. You have to pay out the gate. It still has an operating noise, and it does run for a while. So it can get a bit, you can use the toilet a few times. I'm not sure what the backlog rate is on it, the backlog. But I know we can just keep going with these puns all day. Incinerating toilets are, I think, the easiest way in for those who are looking to get away from the flush toilet. But on that continuum of living with ethics, that's where we started from here. It's not quite there yet. We're using a very valuable resource to incinerate a resource to deal with it. Legally, it is the easiest way to get a toilet handled because it's CSA approved, boom, done, handled. There's no material left for, well, there's a little bit of powder, which by the way, there's maintenance on this thing. It's not maintenance free. You do have to, you get a little ashtray, you still got to handle. But relative to us looking at our fecal matter as a resource and taking accountability for our impact on the planet, I think we need to look at this closed looping of our nutrient. You know, farming used to be about, for example, 50% fencing and 50% moving shit around. But right now we are moving nutrient from the land and into our bodies and into chemical treatment facilities and waterways. And there's nothing sustainable about it. So we can talk about solar panels all day long and get the fuzzy heart feelings, but if we don't address this, we can't exist on this planet sustainably unless we address that nutrient cycle. So that's just a deep thought for us to mull on.
Thanks, Kenton. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Because it is, I mean, yeah, like you said, the solar and the wind and everything like that is one thing, but how do you dispose, which has always been one of the challenges that I've had, living on other people's property, and then, or looking for raw land and they say there's no septic. I'm like, okay, so that means, okay, what am I supposed to do now? Because I have a composting toilet, but I still have gray water.
Yeah.
So I'm halfway there on half of it. I suppose I can dispose of it all, but I'm halfway there. So definitely something to think about.
I'd like you touched on gray water too, because that's another huge topic unto itself. And I think a huge thing about what I appreciate about Tiny House Alliance in particular is it's about raising accountability and advocacy for the movement. And gray water is something we should have had legalized across this country 10 years ago. And
absolutely agree. Yeah.
We are a dinosaur compared to many other countries in the world. You look at Australia, you look at Europe, and they have gray water pipes. But here we are, because we're a water-rich country, we don't have to manage our water as such the resource that it is. And so we go, oh, it's not legal. You're not allowed to have a gray water system. And by the way, I really, really support those. Kudos to those who say, you know what, that system doesn't make sense. And I take accountability for my impact on the planet. And that water is a resource as well. There are ways to work around this system, and I can't give this as legal advice. But I can tell you right now, if it goes down the drain, you're not supposed to redirect and change where it goes. It's supposed to go into a black pipe. It is now considered sewage.
Yeah.
If it
Which
doesn't
is-
go down that pipe, you can't get in trouble. So you know
Yeah.
how grandma kept a rinse basin in the sink? She washed the dishes. If you throw that on your garden, that's not illegal.
No.
So for those who want to do a little self-empowerment, there's ways to work around the system here, but know that Canada should be held accountable and that we should be advocating for this change because we shouldn't have to use wash basins in our sink to be accountable with our gray water.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was living out on friend's property, and before we hooked up to the sewer system, we may have emptied out the dishwater, shower, washer, dryer, and other things around the trees to water all the trees. The trees were great. The grass was nice and green everywhere the water was. It was amazing how well things grew, and
Mhm.
that was considered waste water. And I don't look at that as waste either. If I can reuse it, I'm going to try and reuse it.
Yeah.
Even if I have to filter it through a couple rain barrels full of sand or charcoal, I think we should be definitely reusing it because it's a waste, really. Yeah.
As a permaculture teacher, I always like saying, like, what is waste? Because really, it's a human invented word. If you look at any natural system, like a forest, and say, like, what is waste in a forest?
Mhm.
Nothing.
Everything goes back in. So it's a lack of creativity for us, and also a devaluing of a resource to our larger systems around us, which we need to thrive. So we're really
Yeah.
robbing it and robbing ourselves of an opportunity to exist better in our environment
Yeah.
by not
So-
seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd like to maybe respond to a few of the questions, Barbara,
Sure.
primarily since we're on the gray water. It just asked that, Emma from Facebook, in the scenario with the incinerating toilet, where
Yep.
would your gray water go? We did just talk about with Zenton or Kenton. I do that all the time, by the way. That's okay. I have my clients, I reverse their letters on the first name of the couples. And so I'm just reinventing everybody.
Zenton's a cool name. I'll take it.
Denton, we'll take it. So what I have discovered, so my clients, some of them, and it's the full disclaimer, it may or may not be legal in your region, and things that you do for off-grid, it's definitely always best to do your research and due diligence to see what is and what is not in your local municipalities. But that said, out of sheer necessity and for doing things in the right way, what I always suggest to my clients, if they're going to do, say, a swale or a French Creek system, that they do a double filtration or something along those lines to make sure that you are taking out the impurities and also using very highly biodegradable, eco-friendly products. And so that's going to be the most important value. And you can, and I have clients who do water their organic gardens from what they, discard after they've, done their dishes or done their laundry. I have clients who use vinegar in their laundry, and that's it. I have clients that are very conscientious about what they put on their skin. And so that's going to be part and parcel, I believe, to living off grid, is being very conscientious of what you're putting in your body. There's a lot of, if you're doing, back to the excrement conversation, but if you have, you're taking antibiotics or you're taking a strong prescription, those kind of things have to be very much taken into consideration, because there's toxic, contamination and things like that can happen. And we're really, like our bodies are sensitive ecosystems, but when whatever we put into our body, not all generally doesn't stay. So we have to be very mindful about what we're putting into, our immediate surroundings. So Barb, like watering your trees and your flowers, primarily, not necessarily vegetation, or, repurposing or composting certain things like that. So Kenton, your suggestion of reading the Humanure, the handbook, I believe it does broach some of those subjects. I've scanned it before. But yeah, those kind of things are very important. So you can have, some of my clients do have out of their waste drainage and it's not connected to their toilet, but the black water can also be created by your laundry. So it all depends on what you're putting in there. So if you're heavy duty mechanic, or you work in a climate or a place with chemicals, you could be creating a black water situation. So it's really being mindful about what it is that you're washing and what chemicals you're using. So I just thought to stipulate about that.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the other questions, a Facebook question from Jean-Marc: favorite supplier off-grid knowledge and products besides, going to Kenton and Pam for this stuff. Do you guys have a favorite? Not maybe, to plug them, but is there a certain place that has good things, knowledge, a lot of good products, good prices, stuff like that?
There is one I have gotten a couple things through before. The Cabin Depot,
Yeah.
Canada. They've got a good product range. So definitely check them out. Water heaters, appliances, solar panels, batteries, inverters. They got all sorts of stuff that they sell. So go ahead and take a browse there. And they're Canadian, so love it.
Yeah. And if you're in the eastern part of Canada, in Ontario, there is a Canadian Off-Grid, and it's a young family who have created their website as well. He was at the Tiny Home Show in Ancaster in August last year. And so whenever and however I can, I like to support him and his company. So that's the Canadian Off-Grid .ca, I believe. And I just can't remember his name for whatever, like this very minute, but yeah, so there's those two options. And then of course you can go direct to this majority of the suppliers. Cinderella, they don't have a direct line unless you're a builder, so you can get those at Home Hardware and places like that as well, which is interesting. Home Hardware has Unique and Cinderella and some Off-Grid, and it really surprised me because anyway, but you have to pay a shipping, a freight fee with them, whatever you order. So yeah.
Cool.
Mhm.
Actually, I actually subscribe to Cabin Depot. I get my composting toilet bags all the time from those guys. So
Yeah.
they're always sending me emails. I'm like, oh, look at that. Oh, look at that. Look at that, a stove. Oh, look at that. It's like Christmas every time I get an email from those guys. They have a lot of really interesting things, and they actually explain a lot of things and how everything works. So that's good for me because I'm not quite, like I said, I'm not quite there yet.
Are
Yeah,
you using a separate?
Pardon me?
Are
Yeah,
you
I
using
have
the
a
separate
separate.
model? Yeah.
I am, yeah. And you know what? It's funny. It's the first thing people ask. Well, what do you do with it? I'm like, well, wouldn't you like to know? But it is like you mentioned, Kenton. People are like, really? You do that? You put it in a bag, and then what do you do with it? It's like, do you have a dog? Do you pick up your dog's poop? Do you put it in a bag? So do I. That's how you have to do it. And right now it's not being composted, but I do dispose of it and it's taken care of until I can use it properly, so
Yeah.
to speak. Yeah. But it's
There's
one of
some-
those things.
There's some really accessible composting systems out there too that I find that, again, it comes down to that self-education again. Same way
Mhm.
it'd be nice for us to understand our power and how it works from solar panels to battery inside the house. Same way we're capturing water off our roof and where do we get water from again? The same thing is like, well, how do we handle waste safely? I do understand, and there's a reason why there's legalities around the handling of it, but knowing how it goes back to organic matter safely is very important for us to know, regardless whether you practice it or not. Rather than being like, oh, this is toxic and get it away from us. Oh God. So I think that there's a very accessible information. Again, that Human Order Handbook goes deeper into this, but there's all sorts of composting systems that people, if they're wanting to do the reskilling side of this, that they can take on composting themselves in their own backyard very, very safely. Just know that, again, right now, the way the rules are set up, you can get in trouble depending on where you are based on how you handle this.
Yeah. Yeah. So that kind of also brings it to what is, and this is a question asking for both of you guys, what is one of the biggest misconceptions of being off grid?
Oh God, there's a lot of them actually. One is I think I call it cabin porn. to be frank, where we see these pictures of off-grid homes and little fires and people sitting in their cozy and they got their cup of coffee and Instagrammy photo and I live off-grid. And it's like, oh yeah, and they're like, it's chopping wood, you know? It's like checking the dial on your propane tank, be like, oh God, when is
Yeah.
the next fill? It's looking at your batteries and going, do I use the projector tonight for movie night or do I forego because I don't have enough power in my battery? So it's more a lifestyle choice of maintenance and monitoring and awareness than it is rosy memories in front of a little fire. So you can have that too. You really can. But I think that the biggest misconception is that this is not going to be work or this is going to be easy and this is going to be cheap. So it's very good for people to be grounded in this, that there's work involved. There's a cost involved, and there is definitely self-empowerment. There's pride that comes out of it, but there's a trade-off to controlling your systems like this, and that means an extra level of responsibility.
Yeah, I agree. If I believe it can become all consuming. No pun intended again, but if you end up thinking about your energy very conscientiously all the time. So, and very much aware of what you're using and what activities, like you said, Kenton, that you're doing. And then of course, all the things that you try to think of at the beginning, you're not going to get it right 100% right off the get-go. So like even building with us that have a lot of knowledge, there could be some things that you just aren't thinking about ahead of time. And really having a preparation of kind of the way you want to live, what comfort level you want to get out of, and you know, what is it that you want to do truly. So like you said, chopping firewood all the time. If you do get a cubic mini, you're going to be putting mini fire sticks and it's not going to be lasting a very long time. Whereas if you want to upgrade to a Morso, there may be more so that you can do with your size of wood that might have a more sustainability throughout the night. So, I suggest sometimes having a backup propane system so that you can take that edge off while you're chopping firewood, getting your fire ready. So like you said, the glitz and the glamour, I always recommend, instead of, putting in supercharged things, like we put in propane operated dryers before in our house. This one behind me has a propane operated dryer. They don't make compact propane operated dryers. So you have a full size washer dryer system. And so you have to think about how much landscape you want that unit to have. It uses propane. It doesn't use a lot of electricity, but I think just omitting having any dryer system, and if you have a wood stove or an adequate propane heat system, you're hanging your clothes up in your house, and so that's not sexy. But it is, it's doable. Hang them up at night, take them down in the morning. Generally, everything dries while you're sleeping. But there's definitely trade-offs, right? But I live in a almost off-grid house. I have a well. When the power goes off, the water stops working. I have propane, which I don't have a dial that tells me, so I'm always constantly shaking bottles. And yes, I do run out. So there are some things that we just have to be mindful of. And what do you have? You always have to have a backup plan. So. Yeah.
Love that you said that. Yeah, that's a huge peace of mind is so valuable.
It is.
One or two scares before you're like, oh no, need to back this up. I should change it up, because peace of mind is so valuable. So having 2 ways to heat your house, having 2 ways to heat your water, having 2 ways to get your water, always having that backup. And this is why off-grid systems can cost a lot more. Is one, you shouldn't skimp on any one of the systems because it's not going to meet your needs well. But then 2, what happens if you get gray weather for a week? What happens if you're snowed in and your water truck can't come fill you if you got a water tank system? So it's always really good to back up your systems. And I can speak to my house and how I did it. So I have 2 water tanks inside my house, one inside the couch and one inside a counter. Between the 2 of them, I almost have 2,000 liters of water inside the house. This answers someone's question in the forum about where does the water go? This is a great way in Canada to hold your water, but it requires very good design. We're talking a custom water tank. You need good work with the plumber to fit your things around these tanks, because you don't just want a tank sitting in your very limited real estate of your home. But inside a couch, inside the counter, that kind of works. I also have to say that that is ingenious, in my opinion, for anyone out there who's looking at building any kind of home. Put water or another dense material inside your house because it acts as a battery for heat. It absorbs the heat during the day or when you're having a heating device turn on and slowly releases it over a long time instead of just heating up the air, which is much easier to leave our homes.
Mhm.
So I put 2 tanks in my home because now I have one that I run on, and when it runs out, well, guess what I do? I pick up the phone and I schedule for a water fill in the next week. So that's a resiliency side there. I've got these little tiny tanks you can see right here. They're my safety. They're there
Mhm.
sitting there full, and they're not meant to run any kind of house needs in a cold climate Canada, but it'll last me a day or two. I've got a big propane pig that sits behind the house, and that runs almost the whole year. But if it ever runs low, I'm not looking at that dial on top of it. I do have a resiliency of having a quick little extra storage of propane. So there's a good example of resiliency. I've also got it with the propane for heating, but then I also have the wood stove. So again, some people go, oh, I'm just going to have wood heat. Do not recommend. I do not recommend that you rely on wood heat as your only source of heat in Canada. It's just gonna make you change to your house. And if you ever aren't near your house and it gets too cold, then your water lines inside your house could freeze and now they're gonna burst. So right out the gate, just think about that through in terms of a vacation, in terms of, something happens, you can't get back to your house in a 24-hour period, 48-hour period. Like it's very smart to back up all your systems. So
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely agree with that 100%. I think I drove my builder absolutely crazy. Because when I was doing mine, I wanted everything had to run off propane just in case. I have a wood stove just in case. Unfortunately, my fridge is electric, but it's easy to maybe find a generator for a couple hours or a day or two and run a generator. But I've got the propane heat, so I'm off grid there. I have a freshwater tank I can use and a gray storage tank. So having those backup plans is amazing, which brings it to sort of not just backup plans, but we talked at the very beginning of the question, what kind of luxuries can you have, or can you have it all and still be off grid? Or do you have to go bare minimums? Because like you said, Kenton, when everybody sees that off grid, it's either the cozy sitting beside the fire, or you see the hippie long hair, bath out of the bucket of warm water type thing. It's either one or the extreme to the other. So can you have it all and still be off grid?
I would say yes, but that's about good design. So knowing, again, we've kind of said it a couple times, is like, why are you doing this? What are your priorities? And if you're really clear on that, the details follow. Versus I think some people sometimes get excited about the details. They see the cute little wood stove, for example, I gotta have that. It's like, well, wait a second. Do you want to chop the wood? Where are you getting the wood from? Do you like the idea of having to become a fire engineer? Because at the end of the day, when you light a fire, you have to know how a fire works to manage it well. Otherwise, you're building creosote. And then you could have a chimney fire, and then your house burns down. That's not worth it. You need to understand a little bit about the basics of fire mechanics. So I think it's really important for people to clarify their lifestyle goals, their living, like what do they really want? And from there, they can have it all. But it does take good design. And then in the case of have it all, there's money involved. If you want to have all those systems backed up and you want to have them all feeling, this kind of awesome thing in the middle you're describing, there's going to be a cost to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also agree. It's very challenging to find a firewood cutter. Like if there's people that cut firewood in your community, to cut it to the length that you need. So operating a chainsaw might become part of your repertoire. It just, there's certain things, like if that's not your comfort zone, then you might get a little stuck trying to get those kind of little pieces of wood cut. So, I mean, it is definitely, you become, a lumberjack in a sense.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna say, yeah, like you are correct, Kenton, when you said it's about, the initial amount that you're willing to pay at the beginning. We did exploration of having mini split with the AC and all that kind of stuff. It's doable. They can have their own little solar system and little orbit that goes with that specific appliance, and so you can have separate units. So you have your home operating off of one part of a solar system, and your other one comes with, so like a mini split comes with a separate operating system. So you can have air conditioning in the summertime. But with that comes a level of responsibility, like you say, and increased costs. I mean, sometimes, here in BC where I live, we have 10 months of rain. So solar is definitely a very big challenge for us. We don't have bright sunny days with white snow cascading around us. We have rain, and more rain. So, in order for us to have a solar system, it's definitely, we have to be very selective of what we have operating off of a solar system that doesn't absorb. There are amazing solar systems out there, and we have, I've actually had the privilege of operating off of one while we were getting things prepared, and it was the grayest day. It was ugly outside. It was raining. And I watched this thing increase in, the batteries were like rising, and I thought, this is amazing. So there are really skookum systems out there, but they do cost a lot more. And, it's very doable, but you just have to be, we can help you walk through some of that stuff, but it's very interesting to see what is out there and what you can have. But luxuries, you can. This home behind me is a completely off grid, and it doesn't feel like like you just said, the woodshed with the with the half moon door, and the outhouse out back, and it doesn't have to be that rustic. It can be very nice by design. Yeah.
Rustic chic.
Rustic chic.
Rustic chic.
That's what everyone wants. They're rustic chic.
Yeah.
I was gonna answer, actually. I see there's 2 questions, and we're touching base with them. Brad, hey Brad from Facebook. I see you were asking about recommendations for a small propane heater, but you also said about the Cubic Mini, and that Pamela nailed it. It's great and warm for 2 hours, and then you go to bed and it gets cold.
Yeah.
And I want to go back to what I said about thermal mass, about water or something heavy in your house. Now, tiny homes on wheels in particular, you're not looking to engineer a bunch of extra weight in to blow at your axles, but water is removable. So if you have a water tank and you have that residual heat going into your air and into the surrounding environment, and it can actually sink into, say, a countertop, into a brick or stone back protective area for behind the wood stove. There's a reason why a lot of wood stoves have usually a big mantelpiece and a big stone feature, is because that absorbs all the heat. So when you're talking about the getting cold again 2 hours after you go to bed, it's because you created a bunch of hot air and the hot air leaves, and that heat isn't sticking around. So I don't have that same issue. I have the Cubic Grizzly, the upgraded model of the Mini, and I light it in the evening. I let it go and get to peak temperature. I load it up once, might come back a second time depending on how long the evening is when I go to bed, and I dampen it down after it's gotten to its peak temperature, and the house it drops only like 3 or 4 degrees in the house over the whole night. But that's really important about that is that, we talk about good house design as well. It's not just around a person, it's around our climate. So we got to talk about, like, what is good insulation? What is good windows? Where are the leaky points in the house? How do we talk about, air ventilation? These are all very important things, and builders go deep into this, as Pamela knows, to try to get these homes to work well for Canada. And this is a part of what I teach in the workshop too. It's like, we have to understand how homes work, because we all need it. Why weren't we taught this in school? So yes, you can use your Cubic Mini still, and it can still be a great way, but you might want to use a small propane heater. Pamela, do you have any small propane heaters?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say your building envelope is really important, and your insulation factor. And so we really focus on that. And the other is, you can triple glaze your windows and do a whole bunch of, amazing things for cold clients, and even hot weather, those kind of things are very important. Your insulation factor helps keep your house cool in the summertime. So we really look at that. And the other part is just a suggestion for anybody who is building or getting a builder to build a tiny home. If it's regionally is really important. So when we know what home is going somewhere, we build it to the specifications or the codes that it would be needed in the specific region that you live. So it's really important to have an understanding of how cold your climate gets, how hot your climate gets. The other thing to emphasize on your wood stove or even a propane stove is to, like, we're going to create this little box with heat shield, metal heat shield, but you can build up rocks, like you just said, they're removable, You can build up rocks around it so you can get the heat to absorb into the stone. You can take them out for transport and put them back. It's kind of like a fish tank. You take the rocks out, clean them and whatever. But yeah, so I mean, there's water based, or there's, mason based that you can keep masonry in your home as well. And there's a lot of different ideas that you can do sort of around that. So yeah.
My friend has a removable cobblestone floor in his living room,
Beautiful.
tiny house. And so when he hauls it, he takes all the cobblestones, of course, out. But when he's in parked in place, he's got a big double glass door that faces south that
Mhm.
warms up the cobblestones, passive solar design. Again, you said it, the envelope comes first.
Yeah.
And actually, I'd like to take that thought even one further, because there was a question way back up in that someone had submitted from Facebook, Emma. As summers keep getting hotter, what are the best ways to keep your off-grid tiny house cool? This also is about winter as well. And that is, before we even get to our envelope, we can resist and work with the forces of nature before they hit our house. So shelter belts are a good example of this. Of course, if your house is tiny house movable, you can move it around to learn to live on your landscape, which I think is a beauty about the portable style tiny homes. But otherwise, you can plant your trees as soon as you move in, and you should, because you wouldn't stand outside in a wind chill without a windbreaker or a coat on. Well, why are our homes standing outside in the cold winter with a winter chill hitting them? We're losing our heat out of our windows, not just because they're not as well insulated as our walls, but because they are a solid material and they will constantly siphon the heat from inside to the outside. So
Yeah.
if that wind isn't touching that window and causing that negative wind chill of who knows how cold, based on where you were at. I'm in Edmonton, Alberta. We get pretty bloody cold with the wind chill. We can definitely make our homes more comfortable from both a heating and a cooling perspective. So just to answer your question more directly, Emma, for keeping our house cooler in the summertime, putting a deciduous trees, 1, 2, 3 large deciduous trees on the south and southwest side of our home allows for those trees to have their leaves on in the summer, act as a shading device and a transpiration device, because they're cooling, they're breathing out and sweating the same way we do. It cools the air. That cold air then hits your house, and now you're having less heating need or cooling needs for your house, and you have more comfort inside of it. And that's just through the strategic placement of a deciduous tree. Then in the wintertime, those leaves are fallen off, and the sun angle that can then pass through, still come in your windows and hit your walls and heat your house. So there's a hardworking element right there for you from a kind of a permaculture design side perspective of how to create the landscaping around your house to help your house's needs before you even get to the building envelope.
Yeah.
And then once you do the building envelope, now you go on the inside and we talk about how to create an artificial environment and make more of that comfort that we want on the inside.
Awesome.
Definitely insulated blinds on the inside. I don't have
Yeah.
that option of trees quite yet, but yeah, I definitely went out and bought insulated blinds for the winter, and then most of my windows are all on the summer, but that's a design, or most of my windows are all facing south, so that's
Yeah.
to get that summer or get the winter sun to heat the
Mm.
house up. And sometimes I can go up to like 26 degrees in the house just from the windows. So
Same.
if you
Yeah.
can use it, use it.
Mhm.
I have those.
Speaking-
I have those honeycomb blinds, the ones that they do insulate the same way. But I have to say, I wish that I had gotten the blackout ones. That's extra, and I didn't do it. And it basically means that when the sun rises, I rise,
do
because
too.
I live in a fishbowl. It feels like, with all the windows on this thing, and it's just so bright inside. It's like there's no sleeping in.
4:30 is when everybody's up because that's when the sun comes up. Speaking of heat, there's a couple questions
I
about
saw that from Vivi.
Debbie asked from Facebook, thoughts on in-floor heat in tiny homes on
Mhm.
wheels. And then somebody also asked about a diesel heater, because propane heat is so wet. I agree. It can cause mold long-term if you're not careful with it. Then Vivi asked about the propane or a diesel heater, sorry.
Mhm.
I'd
What are
say
your
with
thoughts
the
on both?
propane is, you use different kinds of heaters, and the one I recommend is don't skimp out on your utility systems. If you're going to go propane, the best product you can get on the market for this is a combi boiler, and that's what you're going to use for an in-floor heating option anyways. It has an exhaust air in and out. So you're not using that exhaust air from the propane to create a wet environment outside, you're exhausting it. A combi boiler typically also has a heat scavenging device. So you get a much higher return rate on your propane burn for how much heat you collect. So they're scavenging the exhaust fumes before it leaves. So that's a good little thing around addressing the wetness of propane, using a better burner, better appliance, and getting farther stretch on your propane and less fills, but it costs you more at the gate. And it is capable of hooking up with a hydronic system. In fact, that's usually how it works. I have mine go to a heated towel rack. That's right. I have a heated towel rack in my off-grid tiny house. But in-floor heating is another way to do it. And yes, it is glorious. Everyone who has it loves it. And sometimes I'm a little scared of it because you're running glycol into your floor and there's movement. But to date, I have not heard of a single horror story about that done wrong on a tiny house. I'm not sure, Pal, if you want to add on that.
No, because I've not really used that system. I have sort of a pros and cons thought about having running water lines through your flooring system. So it is somewhat of a risky thing to do, especially if you have the intention of moving your home a lot. So if you're going to be fairly stationary, I think it's going to be a little more successful like you, Kenton. I don't think you've moved since you landed in your primary spot, have you?
Just a little bit on the property back.
On the property. Okay, yeah. So yeah, like you say, like I haven't heard anything negative myself. My question is do they drain it before you move it, or does it add a specific, like a weight to it?
You can drain it. The line is not like, it's not a crazy amount of volume. So for weight wise, like I'm not as concerned. Like, yeah.
Okay.
But
And
rub points, it is a real thing. Like that's you don't want to have a PEX tubing system that's running through your floor and not have thought that through. Because the last thing you want to have is that to rupture. And like I said, there's so many builders now that seem to be doing this, and all the premium tiny homes seem to really I don't say push them, but they definitely, I see that as a very commonality among their models. It's just because you don't have these extra heating devices in your house then, right? You sacrifice a little space in your floor and you get this nice even heat, but you raised the good point. It is a cause for worry.
Well, it's an extra cause for worry. And so when you start putting those facets up there, like, slide outs and things like that, which we won't explore that either. But I mean, we put our water through our floor primarily because you shouldn't have any water in the exterior walls of your home. If you have a builder that does do that, rethink where you're going, at least ask that question. CSA, we generally have a criteria that we need to meet, and majority of the builders that operate through the CSA standards do not put water in the exterior walls. It's still happening. Builders are still doing it, and it's incredibly big no-no. So we put it in the floor, and there is, there could be complications, but we're pretty, we do all the testing and all that kind of stuff ahead of time. I do know people who put electric pads in their floors as well. You wouldn't want that on an off-grid home per se, but people are exploring, they're exploring different options. It's doable, but do know that there's like a concrete base, so like it's a thin set that goes over top. I've talked to people who do install for electric pad floorings. They don't warranty it because the ability for a moving home during the transport, it can crack and break and interrupt the flow of the system. So just really do your homework with that. But there definitely is a lot of things to take into consideration. And with moving homes, there's just a little higher potential. All homes settle, but when we're transporting and going in, and I've taken our tiny homes 4x4 before, and they hold up, which is amazing. I call them pretty robust, but we've taken them to some pretty unique places in British Columbia. And so they do go through a little bit sometimes of where, they need to position. So just keep those kind of things into consideration. But I'd like to pick your brain more, Kenton, about the sort of the glycol in floor, the combi boiler and things like that, because that's very interesting to me as a builder to kind of bring that in. Yeah,
I think it would be so cool for people to play with this more. I mean, the problem is the piping systems. Like, I'd like to almost bring them more like truthful. Don't hide them, right? Why are we burying everything? There's ways to do copper piping where but then you've got your solder joints and there's movement, right? So that's the side of like, But
Yeah.
the units that you can buy that put the heat out, they're some of them are really really nice in terms of how they look, and then you've got this beautiful device that you can dry your clothes on that is radiating this heat. You get the benefit almost like a fireplace in terms of that cozy vibe that you get in your house because it's radiating. So there's definitely some opportunities here. The only thing that sucks right now is that a lot of those radiators that you would mount on the wall and would be visible, they come from Europe and they're expensive. I
Mhm.
managed to find one through Wolseley, and I think it was $800 for my wall-mounted towel heater thing. I love it, but it was a very hard find. I had to hunt around and was like, oh, thank God it was only $800 because the ones from Europe were like $5,000.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. Yeah.
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 Oh, wow.
And
That
that's
is
the
cool.
thing, you can have your tiny homes be, like extravagant and have all these amazing systems, but it is like you say, the Tesla, like you can have a standard grade Tesla, or you can have a really, does everything, even drives for you Tesla, if you really choose to go that route, which there really isn't, there's so many things that you can do, so many things in a very small space, like you say, but it is by design. Yeah.
Stack your functions is such an important one.
Yeah.
The more ways you can get something to do something, there's ways to take this too far. You see it in the tiny house industry all the time. It's like, oh, I've got a bathtub and it's got my TV in it, and look at this. And you're like, no.
Mhm.
Too many functions stacked, but there's awesome ways to combine your functions of your house so that they work for you more than one way. I'll give two examples of this in mind. So my towel rack, it's mounted on an interior wall in the bathroom, and that wall doesn't need insulation in it. So from the inside the bathroom, I put shelves in between. So it's like a 2x4 deep wall. And those little shelves are where I roll up my t-shirts, my pants, my sweaters, and my towels. And they
Aw.
go behind my towel rack now. So now I have heated clothes that I
Oh,
get dressed into in the morning. Like, why would you not?
nice. Yeah.
Another example of it is, and someone actually mentioned this. Hey, Shay Stacy, I see you have a tiny house, a combi boiler, an ERV. HRVs or ERVs are very, very important for our high efficiency and healthy homes.
Yeah.
Basically, for those who don't know what the acronym is, HRV is a heat recovery ventilator. ERV is energy recovery ventilator. They're sometimes used synonymously. They're going to make air move in and out of your house, but you're going to get the heat back.
Mhm.
So
And
rather
they-
than exhausting,
re-
go ahead.
Yeah, they also remove your humidity level. So we've been talking about propane operated systems, really important. It is healthy air. It keeps things moving. It does heat it on the intake, and it gets rid of all the humidity at the same time. So when you're continuously moving your air in your home without having like large extraction fans, you can hear it sometimes, but it's very, very, very faint in the background noise. But I really emphasize, for even if you don't have a lot of propane, just cooking in your house, boiling water, making meals. I have a tiny home client who bakes, and she makes her dog's food, and she's constantly making us beautiful sourdough bread. She actually works in the company now, but she builds beautiful sourdough bread, and she's canning, and she's doing a lot of stuff. And she put a HRV. She didn't have it at the beginning, and then she was like, she put one in after, and she said it was night and day comparably to the way her house operated after she installed them. So we really just strongly encourage you to put them in, just because in a small space, specifically if you have many people, pets included, everybody's breathing hot air, especially if they talk a lot. So you're going to be creating humidity just from being in a small environment. And so making sure your air is moving, making sure your humidity level is reduced, but also keeping things away from walls like furniture and such is also really important, and understanding that there's got to be airflow underneath your furniture as well, because you can create a humid climate in a corner of your house unintentionally, but just make sure that your like wood heat really combats that, because it's a dry heat. And then you're looking at actually implementing humidity into your house as well. So how to do that is because you might be creating a really dry climate. So you have your own little ecosystem going on inside and outside of your home. It's a lot of sort of, you know, hit and misses and trial and errors at the very beginning. It's not going to be, like I said, perfect off the the get-go, but it definitely is a learning curve. And once you master how your house works and how it operates, it's pretty phenomenal. Yeah.
That balance and that moisture is so important. But no matter what, like you said, it's a microenvironment. It'll always be taking the humidity from outside and inside and trying to equalize the two. So regardless whether it's too dry or it's too wet, you're always going to be stabilizing, and that's actually does wonders on your building itself, because when you get that contraction and expansion with heat and swelling, there's this like between moisture and warmth, the inside and the outside of our houses are differing in moisture and temperature, and that's where we get this constant heaving and churning and turning. So balancing that with an HRV is so good for our health. It's so good for our building. It's so good for our bill. It's so good for, like, there's all these reasons why using an HRV. I have to say, I actually got into using a Lunos, but with the very early days when they first started coming and selling their products to Canada. So like over 8 years ago. And at that time, their intelligent humidistat was not CSA approved. And I have to tell you, I'm so angry about this, because I have to manually control mine now with a double rocker switch, because they wouldn't even sell me the switch because it wasn't CSA approved. Now, that's not the case anymore for you lucky folk, because you can go get the Lunos, you can get the Blauberg, there's a few different ones out there. And they have intelligent humidistats. Pay the money for the humidistat. It basically tells you what temperature, it senses it, and it gears itself up and down if you're cooking and showering and talking too much.
So that's the smart app that comes with it. It's pretty incredible. Yeah. And they come with remotes, and yeah, they definitely are a little entity on its own for sure.
Super. All right. So I just have, for me, one more question, because we've touched on a lot of composting toilets, the solar, in-floor heating, that kind of stuff, backing up powers. One thing we didn't touch on was wind power. Have you guys dealt with wind? I mean, I know where I am, it is illegal to have a whirlybird on top of your home. I live in Southern Alberta, just out in Lethbridge, and it's illegal. Can't have any sort of wind power type like thing against the rules. What about you guys? Is that something you're seeing more of, that people are asking for, or is it something you guys do?
I think that wind is, every kind of power has its pros and cons. Wind is going to require more of a setup in terms of like, how is this thing going to mount tower wise and getting that power, and it's still going to be incremental. The sun is more dependable usually, but then again, when you go to places like you said earlier where it's really rainy, wind might actually be more reliable than the solar. I'm in Alberta. We've seen more sun hours than LA by Edmonton. So like for me, it's a no-brainer. Moisture wise, we have very little. But Pam was saying earlier about raining 10 months a year. Well, micro hydro is a fantastic, if you have landscape for it. Of course, there's implications and challenges with it as well. So every kind of power, off-grid power source has its pros and cons. Wind is the one I recommend. I wouldn't say the least, but I'd say lean on it as a primary, the least. Use it as a supplementary, or use it for its mechanical energy benefit, like running a pump. You can get that churning. Like farmers use that all the time with cattle. They'll have a little wind turbine to pull groundwater up and put it into a trough. That's a great way. Trying to store it into electrical, you're going to get these surges, and it's going to be less reliable. So look into it and explore it, but I wouldn't lean on it for my primary.
Yeah,
unless you live somewhere like where I live, and you know, on a normal day it's a 50K wind. So here we probably break the whirlybirds, but it's still illegal. We can't have them. But Pam, you were going to say something there.
Oh yeah, so I've looked into the wind power, and it's a hit and miss. I live in a place where I'm exposed and there's a lot of wind, but we have mountain ranges and things that block. Like there's not a lot of consistency when it comes to that. One of the things that, and when you said the hydro power is definitely something that is more sustainable here, because we have a lot of like creeks and rivers and running water in our backyards. We have tons of riparian all the time. So there's constantly that. But one of the things that you can do, and I suggest that you do, now I don't have the specific websites in like that I can ramble off, but there are websites that you can go to that are like the almanac of weather systems. So you can actually look at the history of the weather system in your region and see what is the most reliable natural resource to you if you want to explore that. Of course, explore legalities and things like that, but you can actually look at how it all generates at what times a year and what, you know, and how the consistency is over a period of 10 years, say. So there's things that you can do ahead of time and do your homework and your research just to see what would be the best. Right here, we don't get a lot of sun. We have, you know, we'll have 2 weeks of rain, and then we get one sunny day that helps us reprieve so we can go back to 2 weeks worth of rain again. So, you know, those kind of things. But you can look at the weather patterns and what they're, you know, what they produce on the majority to kind of give you an indication. If you don't want to be somewhere where you don't get a lot of wind. You don't want to be somewhere where, you know, we're experiencing drought sometimes, and so the water, you know, hydropower wouldn't be a sustainable way in, you know, the summertime or the really dry months. So having, like you said, Kent, two different sources, there's two different ways of, you know, the backup is also really important. Yeah.
There's so many ways to actually even engineer your own microclimate systems. And again, for those who are super keen about this, like, you definitely have to look into permaculture design courses. I'm actually launching a new course on how to design your own property this kind of way. But like, for example, if you've got an elevation drop of even 2 feet across the property, and that's not much, right? Most people have more. And you could actually use a micro hydro even off 2 feet of drop. It won't give you much, but it'll give you something. And when you have then some moist water that can drop, you have a kinetic battery. Instead of having a battery that's chemical, you can, for example, when there's wind, when there's sun, move that water uphill. You can move it to a pond or a dam higher on your property. And then you have your micro hydro station. And then when you're later in the night and you don't have that, or when it's not windy, you can actually open up your penstock system, run it to your micro hydro, and now you have power, and you just engineered it yourself, and now have a chemical battery. So there's so many ways that people can engineer their properties to be everything that they want it to be. But Pam hit it on the head here by saying you have to look at what your landscape wants to be and what it has to offer. Yeah. You can't make anything function. So we need to be designers of our own, you know, perfect little homesteads and homes, and we have to take accountability for some level of their design, so we can be the intelligent users of them.
Yeah,
Backup
definitely. So it's a definitely do your
There's so
homework.
many ways to actually even
and
some level of their design.
So you don't know everything you don't know, so definitely ask, do your research, because there's still things that I'm still learning, and I've been living tiny since 2019, so I'm still kind of dealing with new things that are showing up on my place and things that I want to add in and do later. So speaking of which, it's by my clock 4:21. We've been at it for an hour and a half, and I think we only just scratched the surface on a lot of things. And now I'm like, my mind is whirling, and I'm like, okay, I need to know about this. And I've been trying to write some notes at the same time, and I got about 5 or 6 different things that I want to learn. So speaking of which, Pam, how can people get a hold of you? Kenton, how can people get a hold of you? Pam, you go first.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you can get a hold of me through the Alliance. So I'm on the board of the Tiny Home Alliance Canada, but I own Sunshine Tiny Homes. So you can get a hold of me through email, sunshine-tinyhomes@gmail.com. You know, my phone number is listed on my website. So that's sunshine-tinyhomes.com. And I'd love to hear if you have any more questions. Kenton, I think this has been awesome. I'd like to do this again if we get another opportunity in the future. Like you said, Barbara, just the tip of the iceberg. So I'm having a lot of fun, and I know there's way more. I've seen a lot of questions that we didn't unfortunately get to answer today, but opportunity to do that in the future, reach out to any one of us. So Kenton, how do we get a hold of you?
Well, I guess it depends on why you want to get a hold of me. So I'll start off by saying, for those who are really interested on becoming those informed users of their homes again, whether that's from a DIY side or whether it's looking to work with a professional builder for a tiny house, I have a tinyhouseworkshop.com. I'll drop the link in there. There's an online version of the workshop, and I usually do tours across Canada. I don't have one scheduled right now because I'm really focusing on the permaculture side. I'm building out a brand new website I'm really excited to launch. If you're keen to learn more about designing your property and where your house is going to sit and how do you harmonize all these things and just design a good home in general, there's these basics of life itself that I feel like our education system let us down on. That's what
Mhm.
this is all about. You can just follow through any of the newsletters. Actually, if you get on the Tiny House Workshop, you'll get the news about it too. But I've got a website, just my name, kentonsurban.com. I'll drop it in there as well. If you get on the newsletter on that website, you will get notified as soon as we launch this course. We're building it right now. I'm like working with website designers, doing all this stuff right now. So very excited for that. And if you're interested in consultation, sometimes people just said, I don't want to learn it all. You know, you obviously know a bit. Let's talk so I can get my property and you can help me do that. Reach out to me through the Kenton's Urban website as well. And I've got clients across Canada that I help out, whether that's virtually or even coming in to help them build their dream property and lead their teams and do earthworks and all sorts of cool things. Feel free to reach out on there and we can chat.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, thank you guys so much. Thanks everybody for showing up today again. Like I said, it's family weekend, so you're spending time on your weekend to spend time with us. Really, really appreciate it. I'm going to sign off and hand the ropes back over to our trusty web designer guy that handled everything, Frank.
What is that? The Wizard of Oz back there?
Yeah, our wizard extraordinaire that did everything
Yeah.
for us and put everything on. And I want to say
Yeah.
thank you to Adrian and Rachel for fielding the questions off Facebook and YouTube and everything else and making sure that I could see them because I'm having problems with certain things on my feed. So they were giving me the questions so I could ask you guys from the people in the audience. So thanks to those two behind the scenes, appreciate it and making it easy for me. So Frank,
Wonderful.
Anymore. Well, thank you everybody for for joining our event. I hope you really enjoyed everything you guys heard today, and you learned a lot about going off grid when it comes down to tiny homes. Don't forget to check the links that Kenton and Pamela put down in the chat if you want to learn more from them, because I know they, again, like Barbara said, they barely scratched the surface today. So if you want to support Tiny Home Alliance and the wonderful things we do and the content we create and help us advocate for tiny homes, please join us as a member on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Tiny Home Alliance Canada. Don't forget also head over to YouTube, subscribe to us on YouTube, and let's get some more word out that way. If you haven't friended us or joined our group on Facebook, do that. We're also on Instagram. So get us all on the social media, help us spread the word. Doing that helps us grow strong, and for us to be strong helps the tiny home movement all the way across Canada. So thank you everybody for watching, and we will see you guys at the next event.
But there are other opportunities to sponsor and to help us promote and do the hard work and the advocacy that we do here at Tiny Home Alliance Canada. So you can reach out to us and if you have feel that you would like to contribute in a different way, we have multiple options for that. So thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
thank you.
All right, we're gonna make that the end of the webinar this time. So everybody keep an eye on our website and keep an eye on our social media for the announcement for the next big event. And we will see you all later.